Seattle, Washington, October 14th, 2023. I am standing in the shadows of a ballroom that smells like $50,000 worth of lilies. My brother is laughing at the head table, cutting a wedding cake paid for with money my parents stole from me. They think I'm just their quiet failure of a daughter. They have no idea that the little app they secretly sold was actually a shell for $1 billion empire I control. My name is Laura Pierce, and by the time the toast is over, 3 lives in this room will be destroyed. I just have to wait for the signal. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of $50,000 worth of imported white lilies is distinct. It's heavy, almost cloying, like a funeral parlor trying too hard to be a perfume commercial. That was the first thing that hit me when I walked into the ballroom of the Elysium Resort. The second thing was the sound of a string quartet playing a stripped-back, pretentious version of a pop song that had been popular 3 years ago. Everything about the room screamed old money, which was ironic because the people throwing this party didn't have any, at least not until they stole it. I stood near the entrance, smoothing down the fabric of a dress that cost more than my father's first car. From where I stood, I had a perfect view of the head table. My brother Ryan looked like the golden child he had always been laughing at, something his new bride whispered, his teeth white and perfect, his tuxedo tailored to within an inch of its life. My parents were flanking them, beaming with a pride that looked legitimate. To the 300 guests sipping champagne and admiring the ridiculous ice sculptures, this was a picture-perfect American family celebrating a milestone. They saw a loving mother, a stoic provider father, and a successful son starting his new life. They didn't see me. I was the shadow in the corner, the sister who did computer stuff, the one they hoped wouldn't cause a scene. I took a sip of sparkling water, watching my mother adjust her diamond necklace, a necklace bought with money that wasn't hers. I checked my watch. The timing had to be precise. By the time my brother cut the cake, 3 lives in this room would be effectively over. And the terrifying part, I was the one who had lit the match. But to explain how a quiet, remote worker daughter ends up plotting the destruction of her own family at a wedding, I need to start with a text message I received 4 months ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office in Seattle, staring at a dual-monitor setup that ran the logistics for half the luxury venues on the West Coast, when my phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was the family group chat. My mother, usually radio silent, unless she needed tech support or wanted to critique my life choices, had sent a message meant for the whole family. "Laura, honey," the text read. "We'd love to have you at the wedding, obviously, but please, if you come, try to dress appropriately this time. No drama. We can't afford distractions on Ryan's big day. The people attending are very important." I rolled my eyes, typed out a generic, "Sure, Mom," and went back to work. I was used to the digs. In the Pierce family hierarchy, Ryan was the sun, and I was Pluto, distant, cold, and barely considered a planet. But 10 minutes later, another message popped up. This one was a screenshot, and it was immediately followed by a frantic "message deleted." But I saw it. And because I'm paranoid by trade, my phone automatically saved media to a cloud backup instantly. I opened the image. It was a screenshot of a conversation between my mother and her sister, my Aunt Janice. "Finally did it," my mother had typed in the screenshot. "We closed the deal on Laura's little app thing. $1.2 million wired this morning. Finally, we can give Ryan the wedding he deserves and pay off the house. Don't tell Laura yet, we'll give her a little cut later as a gift so she doesn't get overwhelmed." I froze. The air in my office seemed to vanish. I read it again. $1.2 million. Laura's little app thing. My brain couldn't process it at first. How could they sell my business? That was impossible. I was the CEO of Aurelia Systems. We generated 8 figures in annual revenue. We had 60 employees, a legal team, and a board of advisors. My parents were retired school teachers living in Ohio. They didn't even know what I actually did. They thought I made websites for party planners. Then the memory hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The paperwork. When I was 22, fresh out of college and drowning in student debt, I had an idea for a wedding logistics platform. I was broke with a credit score ruined by a credit card my dad had emergency access to when I was 18. I couldn't get a business loan. My parents, in a rare moment of apparent benevolence, offered to help. They set up an LLC, put the initial bank accounts in their names, and signed the incorporation papers because banks trust homeowners, sweetheart. They told me they were protecting me. They said, "We'll hold this for you until you're on your feet." That was 10 years ago. I had built the code, found the clients, and eventually, as the business exploded, I incorporated a new entity, Aurelia Systems, to handle the massive volume. I had hired lawyers to structure the new corporation properly. But, and this was the fatal flaw I had ignored out of laziness and a misplaced sense of trust, I never formally dissolved that original shell company. The intellectual property, the original brand name that I barely used anymore, and the foundational code rights were technically still tied to that first LLC, the LLC my parents controlled. They hadn't sold Aurelia Systems. They couldn't. They had sold the rights to the original IP that Aurelia was built on. They had found a buyer, probably a competitor, looking to gut me, and sold exclusive rights to the platform's foundation for $1.2 million. They sold a piece of technology worth 50 times that amount for quick cash just to throw a party for my brother. I swiveled in my chair and pulled up the corporate registry database. My fingers were shaking, not from sadness, but from a cold, sharp rage I had never felt before. I searched the filings. There it was. A transfer of assets from Pierce Holdings LLC to Omni Event Solutions, my biggest, dirtiest competitor, signed by Thomas and Martha Pierce. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had handed the keys to my kingdom to the barbarians at the gate. And they did it for a wedding. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the monitors illuminating a face my parents wouldn't recognize. To them, I was Laura, the mousy girl who wore sweatpants and stared at computers, the one who never made it like Ryan did. Ryan, who worked in mid-level sales but walked around like a Fortune 500 executive. Ryan, who needed a $200,000 reception to prove his worth. They didn't know that in the real world the name Laura Pierce didn't exist on company letterheads. I went by Laura Vance, my grandmother's maiden name. The tech world knew Laura Vance as a recluse, a shark who ate inefficiencies for breakfast. My parents thought they were selling a cute little app. They had no idea they were selling a critical infrastructure component of a massive corporation. I thought about calling them. I thought about screaming. I imagined picking up the phone and yelling, "You can't do this, that's mine." But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. My mother would cry. She would gaslight me. "Oh, Laura, don't be so dramatic. We did this for the family. You weren't doing anything with it anyway. Look at how happy you can make your brother." My father would get stern. "We supported you when you were nothing. This is our return on investment. Stop being selfish." Selfish. The word echoed in my head. Growing up, selfish was the word used whenever I wanted something for myself. When I wanted to go to a coding camp instead of watching Ryan's baseball games, selfish. When I moved out of state to get away from their constant criticism, selfish. I looked around my office. The minimalist furniture, the view of the skyline, the silence. I had built this. I had clawed my way up from nothing despite them ruining my credit, despite them telling me to get a real job every Thanksgiving. I had protected them too. I sent them money every Christmas. I paid for their cruises. I let them believe I was just getting by so they wouldn't feel insecure about their own mediocrity. And this was my reward. They harvested me. They treated my life's work like a piggy bank they could smash open whenever the golden child needed a payout. I leaned back, the initial shock hardening into something brittle and dangerous. I wasn't the 22-year-old girl who needed them to co-sign a lease anymore. I was a CEO who had navigated hostile takeovers and patent trolls. If they wanted to play business, we would play business. But in business, when you sign a contract, you don't understand. You don't get a family discount on the consequences. You get buried. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Eli, I said when my lawyer picked up. It's Laura. I need you to pull the original incorporation papers for Pierce Holdings LLC, and I need you to find every loophole in the transfer agreement they just signed with Omni Event. And Eli, get a forensic accountant. I want to know where every cent of that wire transfer went. Laura, Eli's voice was cautious. What's going on? Is this a hostile action? No, I said, staring at the photo of my family on my desk. A photo from a vacation I paid for where they made me sleep on the pull-out couch while Ryan got the master suite. It's not hostile, it's educational. I'm going to teach my parents a lesson about fiduciary duty. Okay, Eli said, shifting into professional mode. And what's the objective here? Asset recovery damages. Total liquidation, I whispered. Over the next few weeks, I maintained radio silence with my family. I let them think I was the same oblivious daughter. I RSVP'd yes to the wedding. I even sent a gift from the registry, a blender. It felt poetic. I wanted them to blend into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, I dug. And what I found made the sale of the app look like a misdemeanor. It wasn't just the business. I pulled my old credit reports. I found student loans taken out in my name for semesters I never attended, money that likely went to Ryan's car payments. I found credit cards opened and maxed out when I was a minor. It was a pattern. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. I was livestock. Every discovery was a fresh cut, but I didn't bleed. I just filed the paperwork. I built a case file that was thicker than the Bible. I prepared civil suits, fraud reports, and leverage against Omni Event that would make their legal team weep. Which brings me back to the ballroom. I watched my mother laughing with the mother of the bride, probably bragging about how they pulled off this wedding. I watched my dad clapping Ryan on the back, looking like the benevolent patriarch. They looked so happy, they looked so secure. Oh, they thought the money in their account was theirs to keep. They thought the little app was gone sold off to strangers, and that I would never find out, or if I did, I would just roll over like I always had. I took another sip of my drink, the bubbles sharp against my tongue. The string quartet finished their song. The lights dimmed slightly. It was almost time for the speeches. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to throw wine. That's what a dramatic daughter would do. That's what a child would do. I was here to show them what an adult looks like when she finally stands up. They wanted a wedding to remember. I was going to give them one. I checked my phone one last time. A text from Eli: process servers are in position, waiting for your signal. I looked up at the head table, caught my mother's eye, and smiled. She frowned, confused by the expression, probably wondering why I wasn't sulking in the corner. She gave me a little wave, a dismissive shoo motion, telling me to blend in. I didn't blend in. I stepped forward out of the shadows and into the light of the crystal chandeliers. They had no idea who they had stolen from. They had no idea that the little app girl was gone, and in her place stood the CEO of the company that was about to foreclose on their entire existence. The weeks following the discovery of the sale weren't spent in tears. They were spent in a windowless conference room I jokingly called the bunker, surrounded by whiteboards, forensic accounting reports, and the two people on this planet who actually knew who I was. If Section 1 was the shock of the car crash, Section 2 was the triage. And the injuries were far worse than I initially thought. I had asked Eli to look into the wire transfer, but what he brought back 3 days later wasn't just a receipt. It was an autopsy of my entire financial existence. He sat across from me at the glass table, his usually pristine tie loosened, looking at me with an expression that sat somewhere between pity and professional horror. Beside him was Maya, my COO, and best friend, the only person who had been with me since the days of coding in a garage. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at my hands, which were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. It's not just the sale, Laura, Eli said, sliding a thick binder across the table. We dug into the history of Pierce Holdings like you asked. But to trace the equity we had to look at your personal credit history prior to the incorporation of Aurelia Systems. I opened the binder. The first page was a credit report from when I was 17 years old. They used your social security number, Eli said quietly. 7 credit cards opened between 2008 and 2011. Maxed out minimum payments made sporadically, then closed or charged off. There's a defaulted student loan in there too. I stared at the numbers. I didn't take out loans, I had a scholarship. I worked 3 jobs. Exactly, Eli said. The loans were taken out in your name, but the disbursement went to a joint account controlled by your father. Based on the dates, the withdrawals match up perfectly with the purchase of a Ford F-150 and a down payment on a timeshare in Florida. I felt the air leave my lungs. The truck. I remembered that truck. Ryan had driven it to high school prom. My dad had bragged about buying it for him, saying, "We sacrifice for our kids." They hadn't sacrificed. They had leveraged my future to buy my brother's present. They had saddled a 17-year-old girl with debt she didn't know existed, destroying my credit score before I was even old enough to vote, just to keep up appearances. This is identity theft, Maya said, her voice sharp. Laura, this is federal crime territory. Wire fraud. Bank fraud. And it establishes a pattern, I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't, we didn't understand the contract. They've been strip mining me for 15 years. I stood up and walked to the window. Down below, the Seattle traffic crawled along, thousands of people going to jobs, trusting their families. I thought about the American values I had been raised on. Hard work, independence, the idea that you build your own life. My parents preached those values every Sunday, but in private, they operated like feudal lords. They believed they owned me. They believed that because they fed me and housed me as a child, they were entitled to harvest my success as an adult. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an asset class. What about Ryan? I asked, not turning around. Did he know? Eli hesitated. We found an email chain on the Pierce Holdings server. Your parents still use that old domain for family stuff. Ryan was CC'd on a thread about the liquidation of the legacy asset. That's what they called your app. Did he reply? He replied with a thumbs up emoji, Eli said. And a question, does this clear in time for the venue deposit? He knew. Maybe he didn't know they were forging signatures, or maybe he didn't know the specific legal mechanics, but he knew the money was coming from selling my work, and he didn't ask a single question about whether I was okay with it. He just wanted to know if the check would clear. That was almost worse than hate. It was a total casual disregard for my agency. I was just the fuel for his engine. I turned back to them. Okay, I want the plan. The full breakdown. Eli took a breath. Laura, I have to say this as your counsel. If we execute the strategy we've discussed, there is no going back. This isn't a lawsuit, it's a demolition. You are going to freeze their assets, expose them to criminal liability, and humiliate them publicly. Blood is still blood. Are you sure you don't want to just settle this quietly? We could threaten them, get the money back, and cut ties. I looked at the binder. I looked at the debt that had crippled me in my 20s, the years of eating ramen and fearing every phone call because it might be a debt collector for a loan I never took. I looked at the memories of my mother criticizing my cheap clothes while wearing jewelry bought with my stolen credit. They didn't act like blood when they sold me out, I said. Proceed with the nuclear option. The planning phase was meticulous. We approached it like a product launch broken down into 4 distinct layers: legal, corporate, social, and personal. First, the legal layer. Eli's team drafted a civil complaint that was a work of art. It alleged breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets fraud, and unjust enrichment. But we didn't file it immediately. We timed the filing so the process servers would arrive at the Elysium Resort precisely during the reception. We also prepared a packet for the district attorney regarding the identity theft. That was the leverage. The civil suit would take their money. The criminal report would take their freedom. We also prepared emergency motions to freeze their accounts, the money from the sale, their retirement funds, the equity in their house. Everything. If they wanted to play games with money, I would show them what zero liquidity felt like. Second, the corporate layer. This was where being a secret CEO was my ace in the hole. My parents had sold the IP rights belonging to the original shell company, believing it was the entirety of my business. But Aurelia Systems, my actual corporation, held the controlling interest in the modern codebase and the client contracts. The asset they sold to Omni Event was effectively an empty box, deprecated code, and a trademark I hadn't used in 5 years. I had Eli draft a letter to Omni Event's legal team scheduled to be delivered the morning after the wedding. It informed them that the purchase they had made was invalid because the sellers, my parents, did not have clear title to the assets, and furthermore, that the assets they thought they bought were worthless. Omni Event would realize they had wired $1.2 million for digital garbage. They would sue my parents for fraud immediately. My parents wouldn't just be fighting me, they would be fighting a billion-dollar corporation that wanted its money back. I was effectively throwing them into a pit with a hungry tiger and locking the door. Third, the social layer. This was the hardest part. I hired a video editor, a guy who usually cut documentaries. I gave him the raw materials, the screenshots of the texts, the bank transfer records, the credit reports, and childhood photos. I want it to start sweet, I told him. Make it look like a standard wedding tribute. Lull them into a sense of safety. And then I want the tone to shift. Hard. Like a horror movie, he asked. No, I corrected. Like a true crime documentary. Just the facts. Cold, hard evidence. I want the text on the screen to be readable from the back of the room. Fourth, the personal layer. This was for me. I sat up late at night in my apartment writing letters. One to my mother, one to my father, one to Ryan. I knew I might not get the chance to say everything I wanted to say without being interrupted or shouted down. I poured it all out, the hurt, the years of feeling second best, the specific memories of their neglect. I sealed them in heavy cream envelopes. I also hired a private security detail. 2 guys ex-military to be stationed at the periphery of the wedding venue. If my father got violent, and he had a temper when cornered, I wasn't going to be the one to physically restrain him. As the weeks ticked down, the emotional toll began to mount. It wasn't a straight line of anger. It was a jagged EKG of doubt and resolve. One night, 3 days before the wedding, I almost called it off. I was sitting on my floor looking through an old photo album I had pulled from storage. I found a picture of my dad teaching me to ride a bike. He looked so young, so patient. His hand was on the back of the seat, steadying me. I remembered the way he used to make pancakes on Sundays. I remembered my mom staying up all night with me when I had the flu in 4th grade, holding a cool washcloth to my forehead. I started to cry. Ugly, heaving sobs that hurt my chest. Am I a monster, I thought? I'm about to ruin my brother's wedding. I'm about to publicly destroy my parents. Who does that? Good daughters don't do that. Good daughters swallow the hurt and keep the peace. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over Eli's contact info. I could stop the servers. I could just let them have the money. I had millions. I didn't need that $1. 2 million. I could just walk away and never speak to them again. That would be the dignified thing to do. Then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank, not my business bank, but the small personal account I kept for family transfers. Transfer request, $500 from Mom. Attached was a note. Honey, we're a little over budget on the flowers. Can you chip in? We know you're tight, but it's for Ryan. Thanks. Love you. I stared at the screen. They had just stolen $1.2 million from me. They had stolen my identity. And they were still asking for $500 for flowers. They were shaking the piggy bank for loose change even after they had smashed it. The tears dried up instantly. The memory of the pancakes and the bike rides didn't disappear, but they were recontextualized. Those were the investments they made to ensure the asset would grow. They watered the plant so they could harvest the fruit. It wasn't love, it was husbandry. They ruined the family, I said aloud to the empty room. Not me, they broke the contract first. I denied the transfer request. The next morning, I met with Maya and Eli for the final briefing. "The video is ready," Maya said, handing me a USB drive. "It's powerful, Laura. Are you sure you want to play this in front of 300 people?" "Yes," I said, taking the drive. It felt heavy in my hand like a grenade. If they wanted to keep their business private, they shouldn't have made my business their bank account. "Process servers are briefed," Eli confirmed. "They will move in on your signal. The signal is—" "When I say the words, 'My name is Laura Pierce,'" I said. "And the freezing orders. Ready to file at 900 a.m. Monday morning. By the time they wake up with their hangovers, their cards won't work." "Ryan," Maya asked gently. "He gets a letter," I said. "And he gets to explain to his wife why her honeymoon is going to be canceled because the check bounced." I went to a high-end boutique that afternoon. I didn't buy something off the rack. I bought a dress that was structured sharp, a deep emerald green that stood out against the sea of pastels my mother had requested. It was armor. I booked my flight. I confirmed the rental car. I checked every box on the list. The night before the wedding, I flew into town. I stayed at a hotel across the street from the Elysium, not in the room block with the family. I stood on my balcony looking at the resort glowing in the distance. I could see the tent being set up. I could imagine them down there toasting to their cleverness, toasting to the free money. I felt a strange sense of calm. The doubt was gone. The sadness was packed away in a box I would deal with later, probably with a therapist. Right now, there was only the mission. I wasn't the daughter coming home. I was the CEO coming to audit a failing subsidiary, and the audit results were going to be catastrophic. "Development complete," I whispered to the night air. The rising action was over. The climax was waiting just across the street. I went inside, laid the green dress out on the bed, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The ballroom of the Elysium Resort was designed to make you feel inadequate. It was a cavernous space draped in sheer white silk, illuminated by chandeliers that looked like freezing rain caught in mid-air. The centerpieces were taller than most of the guests' explosions of white orchids and hydrangeas that probably cost more than my first car. A champagne tower stood in the corner, a fragile pyramid of crystal that shimmered under the lights. The string quartet had been replaced by a jazz band, smooth and inoffensive, playing background music for the 300 people in black tie attire who were currently eating Chilean sea bass. I walked in during the salad course. My emerald green dress cut a sharp silhouette against the sea of pastels and tuxedos. I didn't rush. I walked with the measured pace of someone inspecting a job site. When I reached the family table, the air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother looked up from her plate, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened, scanning my dress, my hair, my lack of a +1. She leaned in, her voice a hiss that didn't carry past the tablecloth. "You're late, and you're wearing green. I told you pastels, Laura. We're taking photos in 20 minutes. Just sit down and behave." My father didn't even look up. He was busy pouring wine for a local councilman seated to his right, playing the role of the magnanimous host. "Glad you could make it," he muttered, treating me like a distant cousin he couldn't quite place. Then there was Ryan. He sat at the center of the long head table, his arm draped over the back of his new wife's chair. He looked flush-happy and slightly drunk. He caught my eye and gave a lopsided grin, raising his glass. "Hey, the hermit finally comes out of her cave. Thanks for the blender, sis." I smiled back. It was a tight, shark-like smile. "You're welcome, Ryan. I wanted to give you something that really mixes things up." I took my seat at the end of the table, far enough away to be ignored, close enough to be dangerous. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were trembling beneath the table, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump flooding my system. I took a sip of water, forcing myself to breathe. The room was loud with chatter, the clinking of silverware, the laughter of people who believed they were witnessing the start of a fairy tale. They had no idea they were sitting in a courtroom. The dinner service wound down. The speeches began. The best man told a raunchy story about a college road trip. The maid of honor cried while talking about how perfect the couple was. My father stood up and gave a toast about legacy, about how proud he was to provide this foundation for his son, about the values of the Pierce family. I watched him marveling at the performance. He actually believed it. He believed that stealing from one child to fund the other was just asset reallocation. Then the lights dimmed. The MC, a man with a radio voice and a shiny suit, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "we have a special surprise tonight. A tribute video prepared by the groom's family, celebrating the journey that brought us here. Please turn your attention to the main screens." Two massive projection screens descended from the ceiling on either side of the stage. The room went quiet, anticipating baby photos and sentimental music. I set my napkin on the table. This was it. The video began exactly as I had instructed the editor. Soft acoustic guitar music played. A montage of grainy VHS footage appeared. Ryan taking his first steps. Ryan playing t-ball. Ryan and I building a snowman in the front yard. A collective awe swept through the room. It was sweet. It was nostalgic. It showed a family that looked normal, loving, and whole. Then at the 60-second mark, the music stopped. Abruptly, the screen went black for 2 full seconds. The silence in the room shifted from respectful to confused. People glanced around thinking it was a technical glitch. Then a new sound cut through the speakers. It wasn't music. It was a low, discordant drone, unsettling and cold. Text appeared on the screen, white against a stark black background, in a font that was sharp and clinical. "What would you trade for a night like this?" The crowd murmured. My mother frowned, looking toward the AV booth. "What is this?" she whispered loudly. "That's not the video." The screen changed. It was a screenshot of a text message blown up so everyone in the back row could read it. "Mom, we closed the deal on Laura's little app thing. $1.2 million wired this morning. Don't tell Laura yet." The murmur in the room grew louder. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. Was this a joke? A roast? The screen flashed again. A bank transfer record. The date was 4 months ago. The amount $1, $200, $1,000. The sender, Omni Event Solutions. The recipient, Thomas and Martha Pierce Personal Checking. Then another screenshot. Ryan, does this clear in time for the venue deposit? My brother froze. The glass in his hand tilted, spilling champagne onto the white tablecloth. The video didn't stop. It accelerated. The drone grew louder. A document appeared, a contract signature page. The camera zoomed in on the signatures: Thomas Pierce, Martha Pierce. Then it panned up to the clause: sale of all intellectual property and assets. Then came the credit reports. My credit reports from 2008. Applicant Laura Pierce Minor. Status default. Account linked to Thomas Pierce joint account. Spending category automotive. Travel. The voiceover kicked in. It wasn't me speaking. It was a text-to-speech AI, emotionless and flat, reading the facts as they scrolled. Exhibit A, unauthorized sale of business assets. Exhibit B, identity theft of a minor. Exhibit C, fraudulent conveyance. The room was dead silent now. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. The perfect family narrative was being vivisected in 4K resolution. My mother stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She was waving her arms at the projection booth. "Stop it! Turn it off! It's a mistake! Turn it off!" My father was purple. He looked at me, his eyes bulging. "You!" he roared, his voice cracking. "What did you do?" The video ended with a final black screen and 3 words. "The bill is due." The lights snapped back on, blindingly bright. The guests were frozen. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. People were staring at the head table with a mixture of horror and fascination. This wasn't just a scene. It was a public execution of reputation. I stood up. My legs were steady. I walked around the table until I was standing in front of the bridal party, facing the room. I picked up the microphone the best man had left on the podium. I apologize for the interruption, I said. My voice was calm, conversational, the same tone I used when briefing the board of directors. I know this is awkward, but you see, this wedding wasn't paid for by my parents' hard work. It was paid for by selling my company without my knowledge. Laura, shut up. My father lunged toward me, but he stopped when he saw the two large men in dark suits step out from the shadows near the kitchen entrance. My security detail. He froze, realizing the physical power dynamic had shifted. You're hysterical. My mother screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. We raised you. We invested in you. That money was ours by rights. You're just a selfish, ungrateful little— I'm not ungrateful. I interrupted, my voice amplified through the ballroom. I'm observant. You sold Pierce Holdings LLC to Omni Event Solutions for $1.2 million. You thought you were selling my business. I paused, letting the words hang there. I looked at Ryan, who was pale as a sheet. I looked at the guests. But here's the thing, I continued. I don't run my business under Pierce Holdings anymore. That was just a shell company you made me sign when I was 22. My actual company, the one with the clients, the revenue, and the code, is called Aurelia Systems. A ripple went through the crowd. I saw a few phones come out. People were Googling. Wait! A man at table 4 said, loud enough to be heard. Aurelia Systems, the logistics unicorn. My name is Laura Pierce, I said, looking directly at my father. But professionally, I go by Laura Vance. I am the founder and CEO of Aurelia Systems, and the asset you sold, it's an empty box. You sold a shell. You committed fraud against $1 billion corporation, and you spent the money on ice sculptures. My brother stood up slowly. He looked like he was going to be sick. You're the CEO of Aurelia. Yes, Ryan, I said. The little app thing manages logistics for 60% of the venues in this state, including this one. You ruined my wedding, he whispered, the realization sinking in, not as guilt, but as loss. You ruined everything. No, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing its professional sheen and becoming something sharper. You ruined it when you texted Mom to ask if the stolen money would clear in time for the deposit. I didn't ruin your wedding. I just turned on the lights. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the room opened. 3 men in cheap suits walked in. They weren't guests. They were process servers. They moved through the stunned crowd with the efficiency of sharks. They reached the head table. One of them handed a thick stack of papers to my father. Another handed a stack to my mother. Thomas Pierce, Martha Pierce, the lead server said. You've been served. Civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and fraud. Also, this is a notice of investigation regarding identity theft. My father held the papers like they were burning his hands. You can't do this. We're family. That's why I did it, I said. Because strangers don't get close enough to stab you in the back. The room was in chaos now. The bride was sobbing into her hands. The guests were whispering furiously. Some were standing up to leave, sensing that the party was definitely over. The illusion of the wealthy, happy Pierce family had shattered, leaving only a group of grifters holding a bill they couldn't pay. My mother looked at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. The sweet, passive-aggressive mom was gone. This was the real her. You are dead to us, she spat. I wish we'd never had you. You think you're so smart with your company. You're nothing. You're just a cold, heartless bitch. Maybe, I said. But I'm a solvent one. I turned to Ryan. He was looking at the papers on the table, then at me. There was a moment where he could have apologized, where he could have said, I didn't know it was this bad. But he didn't. He just looked at the luxury around him, the dream that was dissolving. How could you? He asked. We're your family. And that's the problem, I said. You think family means I'm obligated to let you cannibalize me. You think I'm just fuel for your fire. I looked at my father, who was trying to bluster his way through an explanation to the process server. You said you invested in me, I said, cutting through his noise. He looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. We did. We gave you everything. No, I said, delivering the line I had practiced in the mirror for 3 nights. You didn't invest in me. You harvested me. You waited until I was ripe, and then you tried to cut me down to sell the parts. But you forgot one thing, Dad. I own the farm. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent ballroom. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I could feel their eyes on me, some judging, some terrified, some looking at me with a newfound respect. I didn't care. As I walked past the floral archway near the entrance, I saw the bridal bouquet lying on the floor. It must have been dropped in the chaos. It was a cluster of white roses, beautiful and expensive, now crushed under the heel of a waiter's shoe. The petals were bruised and scattered across the carpet. I stepped over it and pushed through the double doors out of the air conditioning and into the humid night air. Behind me, I could hear the shouting starting, the sound of a family imploding in real time. But for the first time in my life, the noise wasn't my problem. The walk from the ballroom to the valet stand felt like navigating the aftermath of a bomb blast. The silence wasn't total. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of people who are too shocked to speak. As I moved through the resort lobby, the staff stared at me. They had heard the shouting, seen the projection through the open doors. They didn't know the specifics, but they knew the smell of disaster. I didn't run. I stood by the curb, clutching my clutch purse with a grip so tight my fingers ached, waiting for the valet to bring my rental car. The adrenaline that had carried me through the presentation was beginning to metabolize into a sickening, shaky exhaustion. Laura. The voice came from the lobby entrance. It wasn't the commanding boom of my father or the sharp screech of my mother. It was a ragged, desperate sound. I turned to see my mother stumbling toward me, her heels clicking unevenly on the pavement. My father was right behind her, his face a mask of red fury, and Ryan trailed them both, looking like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. The valet pulled up in my silver sedan. I moved to open the door, but my father stepped in front of me, slamming his hand against the window glass. "You don't get to just leave," he snarled. "You don't get to drop a bomb like that and drive away." I turned to face them. The cool night air felt good against my flushed skin. "Actually, I do. That's the beauty of being independent. I don't need your permission to leave, just like you didn't need my permission to sell my life's work. We gave you everything." My mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was painful, her nails digging into my skin. "We fed you, we clothed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. How could you do this to your own mother, in front of everyone?" I pulled my arm away, stepping back. "You didn't give Mom, you loaned, and you collected the interest with compound rates I never agreed to. You were counting on me staying quiet forever because you trained me to be the good girl. But the good girl went out of business." "It was for your brother," my father shouted, not caring who heard. A few guests were trickling out now, watching the scene from a safe distance like it was a car wreck. "Ryan needed a start. You have your company. You're successful. You can afford to take a hit. That's what family does, the strong carry the weak." "My success doesn't make your theft okay," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through his volume. "That is not how the world works. You can't rob a bank just because the bank has a lot of money, and you definitely can't rob your daughter just because you think you own her." Ryan finally spoke. He stepped forward, his tuxedo tie undone, his eyes rimmed with red. "So that's it? You're just done with us, over money?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't evil. He was just weak. He was a product of their favoritism, a man-child who had never been forced to stand on his own 2 feet because they had always chopped mine off to use as crutches for him. "I'm not done with you because of the money, Ryan," I said softly. "I'm done pretending that this is a family that protects all its children. You knew. You saw the texts. You saw the wire transfer. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just asked if the check would clear." He stammered, looking down at his shiny dress shoes. "I just wanted today to be perfect." "It was perfect," I said, opening my car door. It was perfectly honest. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother collapse into my father's arms, sobbing. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like amputation, necessary but agonizing. The crash hit me about 10 miles down the highway. I had to pull over into a gas station parking lot because my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't steer. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the neon sign of a convenience store, breathing through the panic attack. I replayed the look on my mother's face. The guilt washed over me in a suffocating wave. Did I go too far? Was there another way? Could I have just sued them quietly? My phone buzzed. It was Eli. "Are you safe?" he asked. "I'm in a car," I said, my voice trembling. "I feel like I just shot a puppy, Eli." "You didn't shoot a puppy, Laura. You stopped a parasite," Eli said firmly. "Listen to me. I just got off the phone with the process servers. They confirmed service. The freeze orders on the accounts go into effect at 9:00 a.m. Monday, but we flagged the fraud with the banks an hour ago. Their credit cards are already bricks. The wedding venue is going to try to run the final balance on your dad's card tonight, and it's going to decline." "Good," I said, though the word tasted like ash. "And Laura, Maya called. She said to tell you that you're a badass, and she's ordering pizza to your apartment for when you land." "Tell her I love her," I whispered. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering that felt less like a battle and more like a siege. My parents' world collapsed with terrifying speed. With the civil suit filed and the fraud investigation opened, their assets were frozen. The house, their prized possession, was immediately at risk because they had taken out a second mortgage to pay for the initial wedding deposits, intending to pay it off with the sale money. Now that money was locked up and the bank was calling. Their social circle, the one they had curated so carefully, evaporated. News travels fast in suburban communities. The video hadn't leaked online, I wasn't that cruel, but 300 guests had seen it. The story of the Pierces stealing from their daughter to fund a luxury wedding became the gossip of the season. People they had known for 20 years stopped inviting them to dinner. The shame was a more effective prison than any jail cell. Then came the corporate cleanup. I scheduled a meeting with the CEO of Omni Event, the company that thought they had bought my business. His name was Marcus, a shark in a tailored suit who was used to eating smaller fish. He came into the meeting ready to threaten me, assuming I was just a disgruntled former owner. He didn't know he was meeting the CEO of Aurelia Systems until I walked into the boardroom. "Ms. Vance?" he asked, confused, looking at my business card. "I thought we were meeting Laura Pierce." "Same person," I said, sitting at the head of the table. "And we have a problem, Marcus. You bought a stolen car." I laid out the structure, the shell company, the lack of IP ownership, the fraud. I watched his face turn from arrogant to pale. He realized he had wired $1.2 million to a retired schoolteacher for code that didn't exist. "I can sue you for trademark infringement if you try to use any of the old assets," I said calmly. "Or we can come to an arrangement." "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to rescind the purchase agreement due to fraud," I said. "You go after my parents for the return of the $1.2 million. You sue them. I won't stand in your way. In exchange, I won't countersue you for corporate espionage or the unauthorized use of my name." He didn't hesitate. He was a businessman. Done. By pointing Omni Events' legal cannon at my parents, I ensured they weren't just fighting me. They were fighting a corporation with endless resources. It was efficient. It was brutal. But the nights were hard. The adrenaline of the war room faded, leaving me alone in my apartment. I couldn't sleep. I would wake up at 3:00 a.m. reaching for my phone to check if my mom had texted before remembering I had blocked her number. The silence was absolute. I had cut the rod out, but I had cut out the only family I had. I questioned my own morality constantly. Was justice worth this isolation? Maya and Eli became my anchors. They reminded me of the credit reports. They reminded me of the years of snide comments. "You're grieving," Maya told me one night over wine. "You're not grieving the loss of your parents. You're grieving the loss of the parents you wanted them to be. You're grieving the hope that they would eventually change." She was right. I was mourning a fantasy. Surprisingly, the community reaction wasn't all negative. I received messages on social media from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey Laura," one cousin wrote. "I heard what happened. Just wanted to say, good for you." Uncle Tom tried to borrow money from my dad 5 years ago and never paid it back. We all knew something was wrong in that house. You're brave for burning it down. There were others, of course. A distant aunt sent me a Bible verse about honoring thy father and mother. A friend of Ryan's commented on my LinkedIn calling me a bitter hag. But the support was louder. It turned out that the American family myth had cracks in it for a lot of people. I wasn't the only one who had been cannibalized to keep up appearances. Section 4 ends on a Tuesday evening 2 months after the wedding. I was sitting in my office, the lights of Seattle stretching out below me. My phone lay on the desk. The legal updates were good. Omni Event had filed suit, the bank had foreclosed on my parents' vacation timeshare, and Ryan was reportedly living in a rented condo, his honeymoon canceled. I had won. The ledger was balanced. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window, I didn't look like a victor. I looked like a survivor of a natural disaster, alive intact, but standing in a landscape where everything I used to know was leveled. I took a sip of whiskey and closed my eyes. I had my company. I had my money. I had my dignity. They taught me that family comes first. It was the first rule of the Pierce household. But as I sat there in the silence of the empire I built, I realized the caveat they never said out loud. They taught me that family comes first, as long as it's not mine. 6 months later, the sky over Seattle was a bruised purple, the kind of twilight that feels heavy with rain. I sat in my office, but the name on the door was different now. It didn't just say Aurelia Systems, it said Laura Vance, CEO. The glass walls were the same, the view was the same, but the woman sitting in the chair was fundamentally different. The silence around me wasn't the silence of hiding anymore. It was the silence of peace. The aftermath of the wedding hadn't been a clean break. Real life rarely offers the satisfaction of a movie ending where the credits roll immediately after the explosion. It had been a slow, grinding war of attrition fought with legal briefs and settlement offers. My parents didn't go to jail. The district attorney, after reviewing the identity theft files, decided that given the familial relationship and the statute of limitations on some of the older charges, they would press for restitution rather than incarceration. It was a mercy I hadn't asked for, but one I accepted. Prison would have made them martyrs. Financial ruin made them real. The civil suit with Omni Event had been settled out of court. My parents were forced to liquidate their assets to pay back the $1.2 million they had stolen plus legal fees. The house, the 4-bedroom monument to their ego, was sold. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo in a neighboring town, a place with thin walls and no prestige. My father had to come out of retirement to take a job as a substitute teacher. My mother, stripped of her country club status, had retreated into a shell of bitterness, telling anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughter had tricked them. I didn't correct the narrative. I didn't care what they said at the grocery store. I had the court documents, and more importantly, I had my freedom. My relationship with Ryan was complicated. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies. We were two survivors of the same shipwreck who had washed up on different islands. His marriage had survived barely. His wife, to her credit, had been horrified by what my parents did. She forced Ryan to get a job in logistics entry-level, no nepotism, and they were living in a small apartment paying off their own debts. He had emailed me 3 months after the wedding. It wasn't a long email. It just said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask where the money came from. I wanted to believe it was magic. I'm starting to see the wires now." I hadn't replied immediately. When I did, I kept it professional. I told him I was open to a relationship eventually, but it would be on my terms. No asking for money, no guilt trips, and absolutely no acting as a messenger for mom and dad. He agreed. It was a sterile peace, but it was better than a fake war. My public life had undergone a transformation as well. For years I had been the ghost in the machine, the secret CEO. Now I was out. I did a cover interview for a major tech magazine. The headline read, "The CEO Who Fired Her Family." In the interview, I didn't trash my parents. I talked about data privacy, about the importance of financial literacy, and about the predatory nature of familial obligation in business. I framed it as an ethics issue. The response was overwhelming. It turned out I had tapped into a vein of silent resentment that ran through thousands of families. Because of that, I launched the Vance Initiative. It was a grant program within Aurelia Systems specifically designed to support young founders who came from exploitative backgrounds. We provided legal counsel, financial separation planning, and seed capital to entrepreneurs who needed to untangle their brilliance from their baggage. Every time I signed a grant check, I felt like I was sending a life raft back in time to the 22-year-old girl drowning in student loans she didn't take out. That evening, I left the office early. I wasn't going to a gala or a board meeting. I was driving out to the suburbs to a backyard in a neighborhood that looked nothing like the gated community I grew up in. Maya was getting married. It wasn't at a resort. It was at her aunt's house. There were no ice sculptures. There were no imported lilies. There were string lights strung between oak trees, a taco truck parked in the driveway, and a cooler full of local beer. The grass was uneven, and the chairs were mismatched rentals. I walked into the backyard, wearing a simple sundress, holding a gift that I had actually paid for with money I earned. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and grilled lime, a sharp contrast to the suffocating perfume of the Elysium Resort. Maya saw me and waved, running over in her white dress, a simple slip dress she bought online. She hugged me tight and real. "You came," she said, beaming. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, "although I don't see a champagne tower. Should I call the police?" She laughed, grabbing a beer from the cooler. "We spent the champagne budget on the down payment for a house." Crazy concept, right? Radical. I agreed, cracking open the can. I sat at a picnic table watching the guests. There were no hushed whispers about status. No one was comparing watches. Maya's parents were there toasting the couple, crying happy tears. They weren't making the day about them. They were just happy their daughter was happy. It hit me then, a pang of grief, that I had been suppressing for months. I grieved the wedding I would never have with my family. I grieved the fact that if I ever got married, my father wouldn't walk me down the aisle because I couldn't trust him not to pick my pocket on the way to the altar. I pulled a small notebook from my purse. It was something my therapist had suggested. "Write a letter to the person who needs to hear it most," she had said. "But don't send it." I had tried writing to my mom. I had tried writing to my dad, but the words always turned into anger. Tonight, surrounded by genuine love, I finally knew who the letter was for. I took a pen and wrote, "Dear Laura, the one who is 17 and crying in the bathroom because Dad yelled at you about the credit card bill you didn't know existed. I need you to know that you aren't crazy. You aren't selfish. You aren't a bad daughter. They lied to you when they said love is a transaction. They lied when they said you owed them your future as repayment for your past. You don't owe them for the food they fed you or the roof they put over your head. That was the job. They failed the job, not you. I'm writing to tell you that we made it. We got out. It cost us everything we thought we needed, but we bought back the only thing that mattered. You are going to be lonely for a while. You are going to feel like an amputee. But eventually the wound will close. You will build a family of your own, choosing one based on respect, not debt. You will learn to trust again, but you will verify first. Forgive yourself for not seeing it sooner. You were a child looking for love in a bank vault. It wasn't your fault, it was empty. Love. The CEO. I tore the page out of the notebook, folded it into a small square, and tucked it into my purse. I didn't need to burn it or bury it. I just needed to have written it. "Laura," Maya called out from the dance floor, a patch of grass where the DJ was playing Motown. "Get over here. No wallflowers allowed." I looked at her. I looked at the string lights glowing against the darkening sky. I looked at the people laughing, eating tacos, celebrating a union that was built on honesty. My phone buzzed in my purse. I checked it out of habit. It was a notification from LinkedIn. A suggested connection. Thomas Pierce, education consultant. I stared at the name. A year ago, that notification would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and obligation. I would have felt the tug of the cord, the ancient command to protect his image, to fix his problems, to be the good daughter. I hovered my thumb over the screen. In the distance, the music swelled, the laughter rose. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. I pressed block. Then I put the phone down on the table face down and walked onto the grass to dance with my friend. They had spent my whole life teaching me that blood is thicker than water. It was their mantra, their shield, their weapon. They used it to justify every theft, every betrayal, every cruelty. But as I spun around under the lights, free and solvent, and finally fully myself, I realized I had learned a different lesson. One that wasn't written in a greeting card, but forged in the fire of survival. Blood might be thicker than water, but character is thicker than blood. And for the first time in my life, I liked my odds. Laura's journey reminds us that sometimes the hardest bridges to burn are the ones leading back home. It is a stark look at the cost of freedom and the weight of breaking cycles. If you enjoyed this narration, please hit that subscribe button. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.